Now I'm going to hand the mic over to Emma Chesworth. Emma is a North East based feminist activist, and she's going to be talking about women in prison.
Hello. I want to start by saying thank you to all of the women and men who are talking about the many issues being raised by the proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act. And I also want to credit Fair Play for Women and A Women's Place UK for all their work. Many of the statistics and facts I will talk about tonight have been collated by them, and it's important that they are acknowledged. At our last meeting in February, I spoke about the issue of sport and transgender issues. It was the same week that Martina Navratilova spoke out about her concerns for the future of women's sports if male-born athletes could compete against women. Since then, sport has been at the fore of many of the main discussions around the proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act, and it's not hard to see why. We've all played sport at school, willingly or unwillingly, and many of us still take part in sports or watch it on TV. It's part of our daily lives, not necessarily actively, but they're all the same. Prisons and how women in the female estate will be affected is not on people's radars as much. It's not something that many of us have to deal with on a regular basis. But the fact is this, that some of the most vulnerable women in this country, those in prison, are being used as pawns in a very dangerous game where only they can come off losing. Some background and context. There are 12 prisons in England where women are held. And figures from the organisation Women in Prison show that women make up around 5% of the overall prison population in the UK. Almost half of those, 46% of women in prison, report having suffered domestic violence, and more than half report having experienced physical, emotional or sexual abuse during childhood. Most women entering prison serve short sentences and serve sentences for minor offences. Most women, 84%, have committed a non-violent offence, and theft offences accounted for almost half of all custodial sentences given to women in 2016. So the reality is that while women are serving shorter sentences for non-violent offences, they are now being faced with being housed with violent male prisoners. In the latest published information by Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Services Offenders Equalities Annual Report, out last November, there was a breakdown of how many transgender prisoners there are and where they're being held. Prisoners who identify as transgender were asked questions about both their legal gender and the gender that they identify as. All the information is self-reported by the prisoners themselves and optional, so the accuracy of the data is somewhat limited. But a total of 139 prisoners responded identifying as transgender, and the data recorded shows that there are at least 22 male prisoners in female-only prisoners at the time of counting. Now, this figure of 22 will not include Karen White, born Stephen Wood, who is a convicted rapist of women. While being held on remand at Newhall Women's Prison, White, a self-identifying trans male, sexually assaulted 2 female prisoners, resulting in a move to a male prison. And afterwards the court heard how Karen's erect penis was sticking out at the top of her pants. Words and their meanings are now seemingly indefinable. So we have a convicted rapist, one with a penis, sent to a women's prison based on their gender identity, who then goes on to sexually assault women in there. When the example of White is used to highlight the disastrous consequences of housing males within the female estate, we're inevitably shouted down and accused of unfairly using White as a brush to tar all transgender inmates with. Not all trans women, we're told, similar to another refrain women are often met with when we highlight male violence. Well, it is perfectly legitimate to highlight White. One case of a woman being attacked is one case too many. I'm not aware of what arbitrary figure has been decided when it comes to an acceptable number of women being made to suffer before we can raise our concerns. After White was removed from the women's prison, one member of the Prison and Probation Service group looking at lessons learned from the case was quoted as saying, "You can't say the system is wrong when it goes wrong once. You've just got to look at what went wrong and make sure it doesn't happen again. No system is perfect, and it's human nature that people will sometimes get things wrong." Well, in the case of White, the results experienced by female prisoners when people sometimes get it wrong is sexual attack by a male rapist. So how did we get to the position where men are housed with women in our country's prisons? Well, back in December 2015, the government announced there would be a review of the care and management of transgender offenders. The review collated evidence from a range of stakeholders and met with many in the transgender community as well as transgender offenders. There's no evidence to show that female prisoners who would be expected to live alongside male-born prisoners or any organisations specialising in advocacy work for women were included in this review. Rightly so, the review looked at ways to make improvements for transgender prisoners and getting the support that they may need. However, the review also relaxed the rules regarding eligibility to live in a prison that matched somebody's preferred gender. So prior to the review, legal gender changed through the acquisition of a gender recognition certificate and or having had genital surgery were the main determinants of eligibility. But this new policy shifted the emphasis away from the legal gender and instead allowed decisions to be about location of prisoners to be made on the strength of evidence of living in the gender the prisoner identifies with. So that is, if you say you live as a woman, you are a woman. And like many of us who've been involved in debates around the GRA, I'm still to know what living as a woman actually means. So this meant for the first time, legally male prisoners with fully intact male bodies could be allowed to live alongside female prisoners in one of the 12 female prisons. So while Karen White may not be one of the 22 male prisoners housed in the female estate now, Jessica Winfield, born Martin Ponting, is. Winfield is a double child rapist and held at Bronzefield Women's Prison. According to newspaper reports, Winfield has reportedly undergone NHS gender reassignment surgery, but it's not known if this has included the removal of penis or testicles. Michelle Lewin, born Sean Pudwell, is a convicted paedophile and again will not be counted as one of the 22 male prisoners. Lewin is currently in HMP Peterborough's women's prison despite not having had gender reassignment surgery. Lewin has been granted a gender recognition certificate, so has a gender recognition certificate, so will not be counted as transgender and will be part of the female crime statistics. Lewin currently retains a penis and testicles. So these examples have happened and are happening now, yet there has been no legislative change to the 2004 Gender Recognition Act. The results of the consultation period, as we heard, are yet to be published, but changes have already been made and women have already suffered. So what are the options available? Well, male-born transgender prisoners say they feel at risk from violence in male prisons. That risk is from males, not us women who are campaigning for women-only spaces from toilets to refuges and prisons to sport. An option could be a third space in prisons, perhaps a transgender unit or wing, thus providing safety and support for transgender prisoners without putting female prisoners at risk. This must be handled correctly though, as a report in the Times newspaper in March revealed that transgender prisoners held at a new prison unit at Downview Prison in Surrey, thought to include sex offenders, joined female prisoners for activities such as fitness sessions and library visits. And that was confirmed by the Ministry of Justice. The vast majority of women prisoners at Downview are low risk and non-violent. It should not be a controversial statement to say that women's prisons should be for female inmates only, but it is. So-called progressive politics has not only allowed, but publicly campaigned for men, including those male rapists, to be housed within women's prisons. That is something that I will never ever stay silent about, and I make no apologies for that.